The wind howled through the Colorado mountains that winter night, but it was another sound that froze the village in place. A single wolf's howl, distant yet piercing, echoed across the valley. For generations, ranchers here had lived with the fear that wolves meant danger. After the state's reintroduction program, that fear had only grown sharper. Rumors spread faster than the snowdrifts. They'll come for our cattle. They'll stalk our children. But the numbers told another story. Less than 1% of livestock losses in Colorado came from wolves. Most came from illness accidents or weather. Still, fear rarely bows to facts. And in this mountain village, fear had a face, a name, and a long memory. As the camera sweeps across the snow-draped barns and the silhouettes of cattle penned against the storm voices rise in the local tavern, a rancher slams his glass down. If we wait, they'll pick us off one by one. Across the table, a young woman shakes her head. We can learn to live with them. Other communities have. Why not us? Outside, unseen golden eyes watch from the tree line. A wolf pack lingers at the edge of human territory, hungry yet cautious. They are not villains nor heroes, just survivors in the same mountains the villagers call home. The scene cuts to the next morning, farmers walking frozen pastures, scanning for signs. The snow crunches beneath their boots, the air heavy with suspicion. And then, a trail of paw prints smaller than expected weaving uncertainly toward the outskirts of the village. A child points. It's not a big one. It's little. The villagers gather their breath, clouding in the cold. Something unusual has happened. A wolf pup, injured alone, has wandered dangerously close to the human world. For some, it is a threat. For others, it is a test. And for the village as a whole, it is the beginning of a story that will challenge everything they thought they knew about wolves. And yet, what happened next when this village chose to act not with fear, but with something else entirely, would surprise everyone. The story of this village is not just about wolves. It is about people, men and women, who carried the weight of tradition, fear, and hope on their shoulders. To understand what happened here, we must first meet them and the land that shaped their lives. The mountains of Colorado tower like ancient guardians, their peaks veiled in snow for half the year. Life here is harsh, ruled by seasons and survival. Families rely on livestock, each calf and each lamb, representing months of labor and the fragile balance of livelihood. These mountains have taught resilience, but they have also taught suspicion. Anything that threatens the herd threatens the family itself. And for decades, wolves were remembered as that threat. The central voice of our story comes from Ethan Morales, a rancher in his late 40s. Broad-shouldered, with a face carved by sun and wind, Ethan had grown up listening to his father's stories of wolves taking cattle under cover of night. He inherited both the land and the fear that came with it. When the state announced the reintroduction program, Ethan was among the loudest voices of protest. "We've worked too hard to build a life here. Don't ask us to feed it to the wolves." Yet Ethan was not alone. Across the valley, Rachel and Gwen, a young ecologist who had moved from Denver, believed differently. With notebooks always in hand and binoculars slung over her shoulder, Rachel saw wolves not as killers, but as keystone species. She spoke at town meetings calmly but firmly. Wolves restore balance. They keep elk herds healthy. They even change rivers by shaping ecosystems. Science shows we're safer with them, not without them. Her words, however, often met with rolled eyes and folded arms. Between these voices stood Sheriff Tom Alvarez, a man tasked with keeping peace in a divided community. Practical, patient, and weary from years of disputes over fences, grazing rights, and now wolves, Tom believed in compromise. Fear won't help us, but neither will blind trust. We need rules. We need plans. And then there were the families, the everyday ranchers, loggers, and shopkeepers who watched the debate unfold while tending to daily chores. For them, wolves were more than politics. They were the difference between a winter of food on the table or hunger in the pantry. The village itself sat nestled in a valley surrounded by pine forests and meadows. At dawn, mist clung to the fields where cattle grazed. In the evenings, smoke curled from chimneys, the air filled with the scent of wood smoke and stew. It was a place where neighbors knew one another's names, where the smallest news traveled fast, and where tradition often carried more weight than science. Still, change was stirring. With the state's support, a coexistence project had begun. Wildlife officers distributed guard dogs bred to defend herds. Workshops taught ranchers to remove livestock carcasses quickly so wolves would not be drawn near. Solar-powered alarm systems were installed along pastures, releasing piercing sounds and flashing lights if wolves approached. These measures were small steps, but they hinted at something larger: the possibility of living side by side without bloodshed. For Ethan, however, these precautions felt like weak shields against a dangerous enemy. He would walk the frozen fence lines at night, lantern in hand, eyes scanning the tree line. Each time his cattle stirred, his heart pounded. "It only takes one wolf to destroy a year's work," he muttered. Rachel, meanwhile, spent those same nights at the edge of the forest listening. She heard the howls ripple through the dark, rising and falling like a haunting chorus. She wrote in her field journal, "The pack is establishing territory. They're wary, but they are here to stay. The question is, are we ready to stay with them?" The tension was not just in words. In town meetings, debates flared. One rancher shouted, "What happens when your science costs me my herd?" Rachel responded, "And what happens when fear costs us the ecosystem we depend on?" Sheriff Alvarez often stepped between them, hands raised, urging calm. Yet beneath the arguments, a quiet truth was taking root. Despite their differences, the villagers shared something stronger than fear: responsibility. This land had shaped them, and they knew its future would depend on the choices they made together. The camera lingers on Ethan one evening as he sits at his kitchen table. His daughter, barely 12, asks him, "Daddy, why do people hate wolves?" Ethan pauses, caught between his father's stories and the reality his daughter will inherit. His answer is slow, uncertain, "Because they're hard to live with." But maybe. His voice trails off. Rachel, in her cabin filled with maps and notes, stares at a pinned photograph of a wolf pack from Yellowstone. She whispers almost to herself, "Balance isn't easy, but it's possible. The land, the people, the wolves, three forces circling each other, each shaping the other's fate." And so, when the first signs appeared, a trail of paw prints leading closer than ever, before the stage was set for an encounter none of them could have predicted. It began on a morning wrapped in silence. Fresh snow blanketed the valley, muffling the usual clamor of cattle and dogs. The air was crisp, almost fragile, as the first rays of sunlight crept over the ridge. Ethan Morales pulled his coat tight against the cold as he made his rounds along the pasture. His boots crunched with each step, the only sound in a world turned white. Then he saw them: paw prints, small, unsteady, weaving through the snow near the boundary fence. These were not the broad tracks of an adult wolf, but the hesitant marks of something younger. Ethan crouched, tracing the impression with his glove. The distance between prints told a story: uneven, limping. Something was wrong. Ethan's pulse quickened. He scanned the tree line, expecting a shadow to emerge, the flash of yellow eyes, but the forest remained still. Instead, a faint whimper drifted across the wind. The rancher followed the sound to a thicket at the edge of his property. There, half buried in snow, lay a wolf pup. Its fur was mottled gray, its chest heaving with shallow breaths. One leg bent, unnaturally stained dark against the white. The pup raised its head weakly, ears pinned back, a low growl trembling from its throat. Fear and pain mingled in its eyes. Ethan froze. Instinct screamed at him to retreat. Wolves were dangerous. Even a pup could carry disease, could draw its pack near. For a moment, he considered walking away, letting nature take its course. But then the pup tried to stand, stumbled and collapsed with a soft whine. Something shifted inside him. Within an hour, word spread through the village. A group gathered, voices overlapping in a storm of opinion. Some shouted, "Leave it, that's nature's way." Others whispered, "If it dies here, the mother will come searching." Rachel Nguyen pushed through the crowd, her eyes locking on the trembling animal. Kneeling in the snow, she softened her voice. "It's young, maybe 6 months. If we don't help, it won't survive the day." Ethan bristled. "Help? And then what? Rachel. Raise it like a dog. Let it grow up in our backyards." The sheriff stepped forward, his voice steady. "Nobody's keeping a wolf as a pet. That's illegal. But the law allows us to call the rescue center. They'll know what to do." Still, hesitation hung heavy. Villagers glanced at one another, torn between fear and compassion. The pup whimpered again, its body shuddering against the cold. The sound cut through arguments sharper than any word. Rachel unzipped her jacket, laying it gently over the pup's body. "If we turn away now, we're no better than the myths we tell about wolves. This is our chance to choose differently." The crowd fell silent. Finally, Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his weathered face. "Fine, but if this goes wrong, the responsibility's on all of us." Together, they lifted the pup carefully, wrapping it in blankets. Its heartbeat was rapid but weak, its eyes half closed as if drifting between worlds. With every step back toward the village, the weight of their decision grew heavier. Inside the community barn, temporarily turned into a makeshift care center, Rachel cleaned the wound while others brought supplies. The sheriff dialed the nearest wildlife rescue, relaying the situation with urgency. Ethan hovered near the door, torn between leaving and watching. The pup whimpered under Rachel's hands, but did not bite. She murmured softly, words meant more for the people around her than the animal itself. See, fear isn't the only language wolves understand. Sometimes it's trust. The minutes stretched into hours. Villagers drifted in and out, bringing warm water, old towels, or simply curious glances. For some, it was the first time they had ever seen a wolf up close, not a predator in the distance, but a fragile life fighting to hold on. That night, lanterns flickered in the barn as snow piled against the windows. The pup slept fitfully, chest rising and falling with effort. Outside the valley lay hushed, the howls of the pack absent, as if they too were waiting. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. His daughter slipped in quietly, eyes wide. She whispered, "Daddy, it's not scary. It's just small." Ethan said nothing, but for the first time he looked at the wolf not as a threat, but as a creature bound by the same struggle every family in the valley knew: survival. What began as a moment of fear became the village's first step toward a bond no one had imagined possible. The first days were the hardest. Inside the barn, converted into a temporary shelter, the pup clung to life with fragile threads. Its breathing was shallow, its whimpers sharp in the silence. Villagers took shifts, each bringing something of themselves: blankets, broth, prayers whispered under their breath. The barn, once a place for tools and hay, became the heartbeat of the valley. Rachel knelt by the pup every morning, checking the wound, cleaning it with careful hands. She mixed formula milk in small bottles, coaxing the pup to drink. At first, it resisted, snapping weakly, its wild nature intact. But hunger overruled fear. Each swallow was a victory. Each flick of its ears, a sign of resilience. Ethan kept his distance, at first leaning against the barn wall, arms folded. His skepticism never left him, but his eyes betrayed curiosity. Late at night, when no one was watching, he found himself standing closer, watching the pup twitch in sleep, its paws paddling as if chasing dreams. The wolf's instincts surfaced quickly. Even injured, it would lift its muzzle and let out faint howls that echoed through the rafters. They were not the deep calls of its kin, but fragile notes, reminders of the wild it belonged to. The villagers listened unsettled, yet moved. It was as if the pup called not only for its mother, but for understanding. Trouble soon followed. On the third day, fever gripped the pup. Its body trembled, its breaths grew ragged, and the wound oozed. Panic swept the barn. "It's dying," one villager muttered. But Rachel refused to surrender. She stayed through the night, placing cool cloths on its body, whispering encouragement. Ethan joined reluctantly, fetching water, steadying lamps. Hours stretched into eternity. Then, just before dawn, the fever broke. The pup stirred, licking Rachel's hand weakly. Relief swept through the barn like a silent prayer answered. Word spread quickly. Some neighbors saw it as a miracle, a sign that compassion had weight. Others muttered in disapproval. They're wasting time and risking safety for a wolf. At the tavern, arguments ignited again. Fear sharpened voices. What happens when it grows, when it bites? But compassion had found its foothold. For every doubter, another argued, "We saved it." That means something. Maybe it means we can save ourselves too. The pup grew stronger each day. Within weeks, it stood shakily testing its leg. Children pressed against the barn door, marveling at its cautious steps. Rachel guided them gently. "Watch, don't touch. Remember, it's not a pet. It's wild." Their eyes widened at the distinction, learning a lesson adults often forgot. The wolf pup began to reveal its true nature. One evening, a rabbit darted across the barn floor. Instinct flared, the pup lunged clumsily, growling though its wound slowed it. The villagers gasped, reminded that this was no tame creature. Yet Rachel only nodded. "That's good. It remembers who it is." Challenges mounted outside the barn, too. Inspectors from the State Conservation Office visited, questioning the villagers' methods. Legal reminders were issued. Wolves cannot be kept. Temporary care only under supervision. The sheriff reassured them. "We're in touch with the rescue center. This is temporary." But paperwork and rules felt cold against the warmth of shared nights in the barn. The village wrestled with identity. Some wanted the wolf gone, fearing backlash if it stayed too long. Others found themselves strangely protective. Ethan's daughter especially saw the pup as more than an animal. It was a bridge between the stories of old and the future she hoped for. One night she whispered to her father, "If we can help a wolf, maybe we can help each other too." Ethan listened. His silence stretched long, but his heart shifted inch by inch. Then came the night of near loss. A sudden storm swept through winds rattling the barn doors, snow seeping through cracks. The pup, still fragile, panicked, thrashing, reopening its wound. Chaos erupted. Villagers rushed in, shouting over the wind. The pup's howls were raw, desperate. Rachel tried to calm it, but it was Ethan who stepped forward. Moving slowly, he crouched, his voice steady. "Easy now. You're not alone." For the first time, the pup locked eyes with him, not with fear, but with recognition. Its trembling eased. Exhausted, it collapsed into the hay. Ethan pressed his hand gently to its side, feeling the faint rhythm of its heart. When the storm passed, the barn was quiet once more. But something had changed. Ethan, once the loudest critic, had touched the pulse of coexistence. The following weeks were marked by resilience. The pup's leg healed enough to bear weight. Its coat grew thick and glossy. It tested its voice, howling at night, answered faintly by distant echoes from the ridge. The village listened in awe, realizing that their small act of compassion had carried farther than they imagined. In saving the pup, the village had begun to save something within themselves, proof that survival was not only about fences and fear, but about trust, fragile yet unbreakable. Winter deepened, and with it the bond between the village and the pup. Yet nature does not pause for sentiment. In the mountains, storms come like judgment swift and unforgiving, and this valley, already divided by fear and stitched by fragile hope, was about to be tested in a way none of them could foresee. It began with whispers of weather. Radios crackled with warnings. Heavy snow, winds exceeding 60 miles per hour. Travel not advised. For villagers, storms were routine, but this one carried an edge of menace. Clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy, like mountains moving against the sky. Ethan Morales tightened the barn doors, his breath visible in the cold. His daughter asked softly, "Will the cattle be okay?" He forced a smile, though worry carved deep lines in his face. "We'll do what we always do, hold on." As night fell, the storm descended. Wind screamed through the valley, bending pines and rattling rooftops. Snow hammered the ground, piling fast. Power lines snapped under the weight, plunging the village into darkness. Lanterns flickered to life, but their glow was fragile against the fury outside. Inside the barn, the wolf pup paced restlessly. Its instincts sensed danger beyond walls and fences. It lifted its muzzle, releasing a sharp howl that was swallowed instantly by the storm. Rachel scribbled notes by lantern light, her hand shaking. "Even the pup knows," she murmured. "The mountains are testing us." Then came the collapse. A roof beam strained by snow cracked and gave way over one of the cattle sheds. The sound was like thunder. Villagers rushed through the blizzard, shouting over the wind. Cattle bawled in panic, trapped by splintered wood. Men and women fought to free them, axes swinging hands numb with frost. In the chaos, something else stirred. From the ridgeline, shadows moved. The resident wolf pack, driven closer by hunger and storm, descended toward the valley. Their silhouettes flickered in lightning eyes, glowing bodies lean. Fear surged among the villagers. "They're coming," someone cried. "The wolves smell weakness." The sheriff raised his rifle, but didn't fire. He turned instead to Ethan and Rachel. "If they get too close, what do we do?" Rachel's voice was firm despite the storm. "Trust the measures. Use the alarms. Trust what we've built." Ethan hesitated, snow clinging to his beard. This was the moment he had dreaded all his life, the nightmare made real. Wolves and livestock side by side in the storm. He looked at the pup, now pressed against the barn wall, its golden eyes fixed on the ridge. Something passed between man and wolf. Fear, yes, but also recognition. With a nod, Ethan sprinted toward the fence line. He yanked the cord on the solar-powered alarms. Instantly, a blare of sirens cut through the storm. Red lights flashed along the pasture. The pack halted, startled. They paced, testing the boundary, but the combination of light sound and barking guard dogs forced hesitation. The villagers held their breath. For minutes that felt like hours, man and wolf faced each other through the storm. The cattle pressed against fences, wide-eyed steam rising from their nostrils. Finally, the alpha wolf lifted its head, releasing a long howl. Then, as if commanded by unseen law, the pack turned back toward the ridge, melting once more into the storm. Relief surged, but the night was far from over. The barn rattled, snow seeping through cracks. The pup whimpered, pawing at the door, restless. Rachel knelt beside it. "You feel it too, don't you? This storm isn't just about weather. It's about survival for all of us." Through the long night, villagers worked side by side. They cleared snow from roofs, herded cattle to safer ground, kept fires burning in community halls. The pup remained in the barn, its howls rising and falling with the wind, almost as if lending courage. For the first time, Ethan didn't hear danger in its voice. He heard solidarity. By dawn, the storm passed. The valley lay buried under drifts, but it still stood. Cattle were shaken, but alive. Homes damaged, but not destroyed. And the wolves still out there, still part of the same mountain, had chosen to walk away. Exhausted villagers gathered in the square, faces pale, but eyes alight with relief. Some laughed, others wept openly. Sheriff Alvarez lowered his rifle and said simply, "We made it, together." Rachel turned to Ethan. "You see now, coexistence isn't just theory. It's survival." Ethan nodded slowly, his voice hoarse. "I never thought I'd say this, but maybe we need them as much as they need us." The camera pans upward, revealing the valley blanketed in white smoke rising from chimneys, and on the distant ridge, a lone wolf silhouette watching. The pup in the barn answers with a trembling but proud howl. That night, the valley learned a truth stronger than fear. When humans and wolves respect the same boundaries, both can survive the storm. The storm had passed, but with clear skies came scrutiny. News of the village's wolf pup had spread beyond the valley, carried by whispers, phone calls, and eventually reporters. What began as a quiet act of compassion now stood at the center of a storm no less fierce than snow or wind, the storm of law, politics, and divided opinion. Within a week, officials from the state wildlife agency arrived. Their jackets bore the emblem of Colorado Parks and Wildlife, their clipboards stacked with forms. Sheriff Alvarez greeted them at the edge of town, his posture stiff. He knew what they were here for. In the barn, the pup stood taller now, no longer the fragile creature they had first discovered. Its leg had healed enough for it to run short distances. Its coat shimmered under the light, and its eyes, once clouded by weakness, burned bright with wildness. The villagers gathered around, proud yet uneasy. They had saved it, nurtured it, but now they faced the question none of them wanted to ask: what comes next? The lead officer wasted no time. "This animal cannot remain here. State law is clear. Wolves belong in the wild or in licensed facilities, not barns." His tone was firm, but not unkind. Still, the words landed like frost. Rachel argued passionately. "We didn't keep it as a pet. We saved its life. We followed protocol called the Rescue Center. The village worked together, and it survived. Doesn't that mean something?" The officer nodded. "It does. But wolves are not symbols. They're wildlife. And when they're raised too close to humans, their survival in the wild is compromised." Tension rippled through the crowd. Some ranchers who had tolerated the pup reluctantly found vindication in the officer's words. "We told you," one man muttered. "This will only bring us trouble." Others pushed back. "You didn't see what it went through. You didn't hear it howl when the storm hit. That wolf is part of this valley now." The sheriff raised his hands for calm, but the debate ignited like dry tinder. Villagers split into factions. On one side, fear, law, tradition. On the other, compassion, science, hope. Voices rose, overlapping. The pup, sensing the energy, paced restlessly in its pen ears, flicking back and forth. Ethan stood silent until his daughter tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, if they take it away, will it remember us?" The question pierced deeper than any argument. Ethan faced the officer, his voice steady but rough. "We don't see it as a pet, but we don't see it as just an animal either. It's a bridge, and you can't write that down on a clipboard." The officer hesitated, caught between regulation and humanity. He explained gently, "The wolf will be assessed by professionals. If it's fit, it will be released to the wild. That is the law." Rachel clenched her fists but knew he was right. Coexistence was never about ownership. It was about respect. Still, the thought of the pup leaving tore at her. At the tavern that night, the village fractured. Arguments crackled like fire. One rancher slammed his mug on the table. "If it goes free, it'll come back for our herds." Another shot back. "If it goes free, maybe it'll keep the elk down and save our grazing lands." Did you think of that? Laughter, anger, even tears spilled as neighbors found themselves on opposite sides of the same story. Sheriff Alvarez leaned against the bar, weary. He muttered, "We fought the storm together, but we're tearing ourselves apart over what comes after." Meanwhile, the pup grew restless. Each night it lifted its head and howled toward the ridge. The villagers heard those howls echo across the valley, mingling with distant replies from the wild. It was clear the pup's heart belonged not to barns or fences, but to the freedom of the mountains. Rachel documented everything: notes, photos, recordings. She wanted proof that the village had done something extraordinary, even if the law stripped it away. One day, she whispered, "People will know this wasn't about taming wolves. It was about taming fear." The conflict reached its peak when the rescue center van finally arrived. White, official, unyielding. The driver stepped out with a crate built for transport. Villagers gathered in the square, emotions raw. Children clutched their parents' hands. Elders crossed their arms, unwilling to watch. Ethan stepped forward, torn but resolute. "If this is the law, then we'll follow it. But remember this. This wolf is alive because of us. Whatever happens out there, it carries our story." The pup, guided gently into the crate, resisted at first, then stilled. Its eyes swept the crowd, pausing on familiar faces: Rachel, Ethan's daughter, even the sheriff. For a moment, the square held its breath. Then the crate door closed with a metallic click. The van rolled away, tires crunching over snow. Silence followed, heavy and final. Some felt relief, others grief, but all felt the weight of absence. The valley had survived the storm, but now it faced the hardest truth of all: coexistence meant letting go. The day of decision came quietly, without storm or warning. Snow still blanketed the valley, but the sky was clear, so deceptively calm that it felt cruel. The rescue center had returned, not with debate this time, but with finality. The wolf pup, once fragile and broken, had grown strong enough to stand on its own. The law had spoken, and now the people had to follow. The villagers gathered in the square as if called by instinct. Lanterns swung from poles, their light pale against the winter sun. Children clung to parents, whispering questions no one wished to answer. Adults stood in clusters, some defiant, others resigned. Inside the barn, Rachel knelt one last time by the pup. She had cleaned its coat, brushed away the last traces of hay. Its golden eyes locked onto hers, unblinking. She whispered, "You don't belong to me. You belong out there, but you'll carry a piece of us wherever you go." Her hands trembled as she stroked its fur, knowing this would be the last touch. Ethan stood nearby, silent. For weeks he had wrestled with fear, with pride, with the ghosts of stories his father told. Now, as he watched his daughter gently slip a ribbon from her hair and tie it around the latch of the pup's crate, he realized those stories no longer defined him. His voice broke the silence. Sometimes letting go is the hardest work a man can do. The sheriff cleared his throat, reading aloud the conditions: the pup would be released in a monitored reserve, far enough from livestock, close enough to rejoin its kind. It was the safest option for both wolf and human. The villagers listened, though the words felt like ash in their mouths. When the time came, the pup walked into the crate on its own. No whimper, no resistance, just quiet acceptance, as if it understood the moment better than the people around it. The door shut with a soft click. The sound echoed louder than thunder in their hearts. The van moved slowly toward the edge of town. Villagers lined the road, their eyes following. Some raised hands in farewell. Others turned away, unwilling to watch. Rachel walked beside the van until it disappeared into the pines. Ethan's daughter ran after it, stopping only when Ethan caught her arm gently. She buried her face against him, sobbing. The forest swallowed the vehicle, and with it, the chapter they had written together. Hours later, silence lingered over the village. In the tavern, Muggs sat untouched. At the barn, the air felt hollow. People spoke in whispers, if at all. For the first time since the pup's arrival, the valley felt empty. But then in the distance, a sound pierced the stillness. A howl, low, rising, steady. The villagers stepped outside, breath freezing in the night air. From the ridge, the call echoed again. And then, from the crate in the reserve miles away, an answer came, the pup's voice trembling but proud. The valley shook with the chorus wild and unbroken. Ethan looked up, his daughter's hand in his. His chest tightened, but this time not with fear. With something else, recognition. The wolf was gone, but not lost. It had become part of the valley's story, woven into its wind, its snow, its silence. Rachel closed her journal with finality. She had written every detail, every note of this journey. Tonight, she wrote only one line: "We let go." But in letting go, we found each other. That night, the valley learned that love is not proven by holding on, but by having the courage to let go. Spring arrived slowly in the valley, dripping from the eaves, greening the meadows where snow once ruled. Life as it always did returned. But for the villagers, something deeper had shifted. They no longer walked their fields with only suspicion in their eyes. Now, each track in the dirt, each distant howl carried a different meaning, reminders of what they had done and what they had chosen to believe. News filtered back from the wildlife reserve. The pup had been monitored for weeks, adapting quickly. It avoided people, hunted small prey, and most importantly, responded to the calls of a nearby pack. Biologists confirmed what the villagers hoped: the wolf had found its place again, running with its kind. The announcement traveled through the tavern like a spark. Some nodded in quiet satisfaction. Others even smiled. A few still muttered their doubts, but the loudest voices of fear had softened. The pup had not returned as a threat, it had returned as proof. Rachel stood at the edge of the pasture one evening, notebook in hand. She watched the cattle-grazed dogs patrolling nearby, solar alarms blinking quietly at the fence line. No wolves appeared yet, the measures stood ready. To her, that was the lesson: coexistence was not about eliminating risk, but about preparing wisely for it. She whispered into the breeze, "We built trust." And it held. Ethan's change was slower, but no less profound. One morning, he found tracks along the ridge, fresh wolf prints beside elk trails. His first instinct was the old fear, the weight of stories his father told. But this time he paused. He remembered the pup's eyes, the storm, the howl on the night of farewell. Instead of tightening his grip on the rifle, he let the tracks be. His daughter noticed and asked, "Aren't you going to chase them off?" Ethan shook his head gently. "Not this time. They're where they belong." The community itself transformed. The Coexistence project expanded: more guard dogs workshops on non-lethal deterrence, patrols coordinated between ranchers and wildlife officers. Skeptics still existed, but they worked alongside believers bound by the memory of surviving the storm together. Even the tavern, once a battlefield of arguments, now rang with cautious optimism. Someone raised a toast to the wolves. May they keep to their side, and may we keep to ours. Laughter followed, not mocking, but genuine. Months later, a sight etched itself into memory. At dusk, as the sun bled gold across the peaks, a small group of villagers spotted movement on the ridge. A wolf pack, strong, lean silhouettes sharp against the sky. Among them, a younger wolf paused. Its coat carried the same mottled gray, its eyes catching the light. For a heartbeat, it turned its head toward the valley. The villagers stood still, breath held. Then, with a flick of its tail, it vanished into the forest. Rachel smiled through tears. Ethan's daughter whispered, "It remembered us." No one argued. The valley learned to live with new rhythms. Wolf howls no longer stirred only fear, but also wonder. Cattle losses remained rare thanks to precautions. Elk herds grew healthier, streams ran clearer, a reminder of the role wolves play in shaping ecosystems. Slowly, what had once been seen as a curse became recognized as balance. The camera pans across the valley, children running in meadows, dogs barking, villagers repairing fences, wolves howling faintly in the distance. The two worlds remained separate, yet linked by the thread of choice. In the end, the pup did not just return to the wild. It returned with a gift, a new way for humans to see, to listen, and to believe that even ancient fears can be rewritten into stories of hope. Every story leaves behind a lesson. For this valley, the lesson was not carved in law or shouted in meetings. It was whispered in the snow, carried in howls across the ridges, written in the silent bond between people and a pup they never expected to save. The first lesson was science. Fear painted wolves as relentless killers, yet the numbers told a different truth. Less than 1% of livestock losses came from them. By learning to use tools like guard dogs, alarms, and carcass removal, the villagers discovered that coexistence was not fantasy. It was measurable, practical, and proven. Science had always said so. Now they had lived it. The second lesson was compassion. The pup's survival depended not on statistics, but on human hands willing to try. Compassion bridged the gap between fear and trust. It asked nothing in return, but changed everything in the process. In saving a life that many would have ignored, the villagers learned they were saving a piece of themselves. The third lesson was coexistence. Wolves would always be wild. They could not be tamed, nor should they. But coexistence does not require taming. It requires boundaries, respect, and the courage to accept risk. In the storm, in the debates, in the moment of farewell, the valley learned that peace was possible, not perfect, not without cost, but possible. Ethan, once the voice of opposition, admitted it plainly. The hardest fences to mend weren't in the fields. They were in here. He tapped his chest, speaking of the heart. His words carried further than data or law. They carried truth. Rachel, writing in her journal, concluded with a single line. "We chose to see wolves not as shadows of fear, but as mirrors of ourselves, resilient, untamed, searching for balance." The sheriff, practical as ever, summed it up for his neighbors. We didn't stop being ranchers. We didn't stop protecting our families. But we learned we could do it without destroying what shares this land with us. The valley moved forward, changed not by the presence of wolves alone, but by the choice to embrace them as part of the story. And though the pup had vanished into the wilderness, its legacy remained etched into the memory of a village that once trembled at a howl, but now paused to listen. The camera lingers on the mountains, snow melting into rivers, elk grazing, wolves running along the ridges. The sky darkens, stars igniting above. On a distant peak, a wolf raises its head to the moon. Its howl rises deep and unbroken. From the valley, children press their ears to windows, not with fear, but with wonder. This was the story of one valley, one pup, one choice. But its message belongs everywhere. Coexistence is not born from fear or dominance. It is born from